Many of the cases we cover here on Cold Case Detective involve the murder of a single person, and it is terrifying knowing that there are so many killers who have never been brought to justice. However, something that is perhaps even more horrific are unsolved cases of murdered families, a crime that ends the lives of not just one, but multiple individuals at once. The idea that someone could commit such an atrocity and walk free, living an ordinary life, is chilling, to say the least. In today's episode of Dead in File, we'll be exploring two horrific, unsolved family murders. The Bricca family. Gerald Jerry Bricca and his wife Linda married in Seattle, Washington in 1961. A year later, on June 6th of 1962, the couple had their first and only child, a little girl who they named Deborah Ann Bricca. By all accounts, the family was ordinary. In 1963, following the birth of Debbie, the couple moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, where they bought a house on Greenway Avenue. In the neighborhood of Bridgetown, the Bricca family settled well into their new home. They were well liked by the neighbors and often hosted barbecues and parties, which were attended by many in the local community. In 1966, Jerry was 28 years old and working as a chemical engineer with the Monsanto Company. Linda had previously worked as an air hostess, but had become a stay-at-home mother for a while after the birth of Debbie. Aged 23 in 1966, she started working part-time at an animal hospital. On Tuesday, September 27th that year, neighbors noticed that something wasn't right at the Bricca family home. For one, Jerry hadn't brought the bins in from the curb as he normally did, and no one had collected the day's newspaper from the front porch. Not only that, but the family's two vehicles hadn't moved from the driveway in 2 days. At 10:40 p.m., two concerned neighbors decided to visit the home to see if there was anything wrong. They found that the front door was ajar. Alarm bells went off when one of the two men, who was a World War II veteran, recognized the stench of death. The men pulled back immediately and called the authorities. The scene inside the home was gruesome, and one that nobody could have predicted for such an ordinary family. Both Jerry and Linda were found on the floor of their bedroom. Jerry was face down between the wall and the bed, and was fully clothed except for his shoes. A sock had been stuffed into his mouth as if to gag him, and a piece of adhesive tape clung to his body as if he and Linda had been bound at some stage. However, the rest of the tape had been removed. It is unclear why the killer had taken it off. Linda was face up, lying across her husband's body. She wore a nightgown and a dressing gown, indicating that she'd been getting ready for bed at the time of her death. It was initially believed the 23-year-old had been sexually assaulted, but authorities later walked back this information, instead stating that she had had intercourse shortly before her death. 4-year-old Debbie was found on the floor of her bedroom, wearing her flannel nightgown and one sock. Clues in the Bricca family case were limited. Both the front and back doors of the house were unlocked, although the back door had been closed rather than ajar. There was no sign of forced entry nor of a struggle, and there were damp clothes in the dryer. Folded clean clothes sat on the couch in the living room. The family's 2 dogs had been locked in a room at the back of the house, and some reports state they had been sedated, although they were otherwise unharmed. A 6.5-inch knife from an Indian carving set made of teak wood and steel was missing from the kitchen. Jerry's empty wallet was found on the bed he shared with Linda, which suggested to authorities that robbery may have been the motive. However, it does not appear that other valuables were missing from the home. No prints were located, and evidence removed from the scene consisted of the family's clothing, hair found in the house, bed sheets, and some bloody towels. All 3 members of the Bricca family died from stab wounds. The autopsy revealed that both Linda and Jerry had head wounds of a penetrative type, apparently not made by a knife. Marks on their arms confirmed that the pair had been bound at some point during the night. Jerry had been stabbed a total of 9 times, while Linda had been stabbed 8 times. Debbie had been stabbed 4 times. Some reports notes that authorities determined the killer was left-handed. It is unclear in what order the family were attacked. Using dates on milk bottles in the home, investigators found that Jerry had bought 3.5 gallons of milk at a Glenway Avenue dairy at 8:30 p.m. on Sunday, September 25th, 2 days before the slayings. Detectives also discovered that Linda's father had called the family at around 10 p.m. that same night to let them know that he and Linda's mother were leaving for their holiday. Neighbors last saw Jerry between 9 and 10 p.m. on Sunday when he took the bins to the curb. The following morning at around 8:30 a.m., Jerry's boss called the home to find out why the 28-year-old wasn't at the airports as he was supposed to be. However, nobody answered the phone. Authorities were able to determine from this that the Brickers had been killed sometime between 10 p.m. and 6:30 a.m. Investigators came up with several theories and reached many conclusions during their time working the case. They believed it was possible that the murder weapon had been carried out of the house, wrapped inside Monday morning's newspaper, which was missing from the family's front porch, and that the weapon had been tossed into the bin due to be picked up later that morning. Authorities also believed that the family's killer was known to them, and that the perpetrator had entered the home via their basement doors. Linda never left the knife missing from the kitchen set out on display. Reportedly, Debbie was a very curious child, and her mother worried about her hurting herself, and so she always put the knife away. Investigators believe that Debbie had been killed, so she could not identify the culprit. The family's 2 dogs were also known to be aggressive towards strangers, yet nothing was heard on the night of the slayings, indicating that they possibly knew whoever it was that entered the house that night. There were very few leads in the case of the Bricka family murders. One of the neighbors who had found the bodies was quickly cleared of involvement. Authorities did not consider him a suspect, but the man frequently received prank calls and harassment despite this. Anonymous callers accused him of murdering the family, but the neighbor was very cooperative with the police, and there exists no evidence against him. Another neighbor recalled seeing a suspicious man walking back and forth on Greenway Avenue on Thursday, September 22nd. 3 days before, the family were last seen alive. However, the neighbor didn't recognize the man and told the police that she would not be able to ID him if she saw him again. The main suspect in the case was a vet named Dr. Fred Leininger, who was Linda's boss. There were rumors that the couple had been having an affair, and that the doctor had murdered Linda's family because she wanted to break off the relationship. While Dr. Leininger's name was not publicly released until years later, he was interviewed twice in the days after the slayings. Following a 45-minute interview, police visited the vet's wife, who told them that her husband was very upset by the interview. She then invited them to speak with the couple's lawyer. The doctor's lawyer, however, had stipulations which the police had to meet before he'd allow them to speak with his client. The police did not accept these terms, and so they could not interview their main suspect. A few months later, in 1967, the police wished again to talk with the vets. This time they were willing to meet the conditions laid out by the lawyer. During their discussion, in which letters were exchanged, detectives listed 7 questions which they wanted Dr. Leininger to answer. However, the vet's lawyer ultimately declined their request to speak with his clients, and no answers were given to the questions. Following this final interaction, authorities kept a close eye on Dr. Leininger, going so far as to follow him around whenever he left the house and being present when he left his office for lunch. Reportedly, the vet began to have more alcoholic drinks during his lunchtime meetings when he realized he was constantly under police watch. Fred Leininger never cooperated with authorities. He continued to work at his practice until his retirement in 1995. According to some reports, both he and his wife entered into a suicide pact and took their own lives together. However, obituaries for the two don't add up. Leininger took his own life and died in February of 2004, while his wife passed away 10 months later in December of that same year. It is widely believed that Leininger is responsible for the Bricker family murders. Much of this belief comes down to reports that the family's dogs were sedated and that the tape found on Jerry's body was medical tape. However, not everyone is convinced that the vet is responsible. Some online sleuths have suggested the idea that the killings were some kind of professional hit. Jerry's employer, the Monsanto Company, is a chemical and biotech company, leading some to suspect that if the 28-year-old discovered something incriminating about the group, or something that would damage their reputation and lead to a scandal, then he may have been murdered, so he would remain silent. Another theory proposed in the case is that Linda was the real target of the crime. Cincinnati Magazine, reported that according to friends, the 23-year-old's behavior had changed in the months leading up to the tragedy. She had also told neighbors that she knew something about a drug case from her time working as a flight attendant. Some reports even state that Linda actually helped break up a drug ring at the time. Others have speculated that the mother of one's death was linked to the slaying of 21-year-old Valerie Percy, who was murdered just 1 week before the Briccas, although there is no evidence to link these two crimes that we know of. It has been over 5 decades since the Bricca family murders shook the small community on Greenway Avenue. Although it is a case that has never truly faded from the minds of the public, it is one that may never see justice. The Chin family. On the afternoon of October 8, 2014, a co-worker of 39-year-old Chin Jinfeng grew concerned when the father of two did not show up for his scheduled shift at a restaurant named King's Walk, nor did he call in sick. Concerned for his friend, the co-worker went over to Chin's home on Western Avenue in the Guilderland suburb of Albany, New York. What he found inside was a bloodbath. Chin and his 38-year-old wife, Hai Yi-lin, were natives of Huyue, China. The couple had traveled to the United States in the early 2000s and settled in Guilderland, near a takeout restaurant which was owned by relatives. Here, the pair had 2 children, 10-year-old Anthony and 7-year-old Eddie. By all accounts, the family were ordinary and there was nothing odd or out of place about them, which made their murders all the more baffling to detectives. The crime was incredibly high profile as it was the first quadruple homicide in the Capital District. According to Chen's brother, who spoke with the media, the father of 2 had been found on the ground floor of the family bungalow. Hai and the couple's 2 children were found upstairs covered by a blanket. The family had suffered a violent fate. All 4 members had been beaten with a hammer, and later accounts noted they had also been stabbed. The murders were determined to have occurred sometime in the hours before dawn, likely between 3:30 and 6:30 a.m. Both Guilderland and New York State Police worked together on the case, combing the areas behind and around the family home to look for clues. According to the authorities, the first 48 hours of the investigation progressed slowly due to a language barrier and a sense of fear in the community. To make matters worse, there was no CCTV in the area, and investigators were hindered by the fact that Apple initially refused to release the Chen's iPhone records. Eventually, the technology giants complied with the request, but law enforcement noted that even still, this block had set them back considerably. Little evidence was collected from the scene of the crime. DNA samples picked up may belong to a suspect, but so far no match has been made, and authorities have few leads or suspects in the case. Before long, allegations surfaced that the family were involved in shady business practices and illegal activities such as human trafficking, gambling, and money laundering. Chen's brother denied rumors that the family had been attacked by someone who'd returned to the house after a gambling party to steal their sizable take from the event, but did admit that Chen would host low-stakes card games for his friends. Compounding this rumor, an anonymous source told Newsday that Chen had shut down his own restaurant 2 years earlier, and he'd been living comfortably ever since, causing people to think that he was making money illegally. This same source alleged that Hai was in the country illegally too. Meanwhile, an article by the Times-Union reported that Chun had supposedly been involved in large transfers of unrecorded cash, which he used to pay undocumented Chinese workers at restaurants in New York City. He reportedly also transported the workers to their jobs and back, and provided accommodation in cities that were too far away for bus trips. Even more damningly, 18 mattresses were found on the basement floor of the family's home. The Times-Union also claimed that the weekly card game, Chun ran, had racked up about $100,000 in debt. However, this is where that lead dries up. Authorities have said that while the organized crime theory hasn't been discounted, they have yet to find any solid leads in the case. The only other angle examined in this case was the possibility that the Chun family murders were linked to that of 2 other family murders around the same time. In 2014, a family of 4 in Houston, Texas was shot in their home. In 2011, a married couple, along with the wife's sister, were found stabbed in their Mississippi home. However, connections have not been concretely made between the 3 cases. In 2015, investigators reported that they had looked into 600 leads and that this was an unusually low number for a crime this serious. A World Journal reporter noted that she and her colleagues believed the family knew more than they were letting on. The Chin funeral was held a month after the discovery of the bodies to allow relatives from abroad to attend. The family were buried at Old Faith Cemetery in Middle Village in the borough of Queens. The case remains unsolved, and a $5,000 reward is still available for anyone with information that leads to an arrest. If you have any information about the Chin family murders, you are encouraged to report it at capitalregionalcrimestoppers.com. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own theories and speculations. And remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. You can also support us on Patreon to win the chance to have your hometown featured in an upcoming cold case detective episode. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.